This is DW News live from Berlin. A burden to be shared. Germany pressures other EU nations to take in more refugees. Chancellor Angela Merkel says the influx of refugees will change Germany in the coming years. She's also urging the rest of Europe to take in its fair share. Also on the show, as refugees flee Syria by the thousands, there are increasing signs of a Russian military buildup in the country. Is Vladimir Putin moving to bolster Bashar al-Assad? And Turkey vows retaliation after an ambush by Kurdish PKK rebels. At least 16 soldiers died, and all signs point to more violence ahead. I'm Brent Goff. It's good to have you with us. 6 billion euros. That's how much the German government is pledging to deal with its worst refugee crisis since the Second World War. Nearly 20,000 new refugees arrived in Germany this past weekend alone, a number that the German Chancellor Angela Merkel described Monday as breathtaking. Merkel added a European, not just a German response is needed. This as the influx of people shows no end in sight.
Bavaria saw the arrival of thousands of more asylum seekers on Monday, just part of the estimated 800,000 that the government says will come to Germany this year. In Berlin, the governing coalition agreed to a plan to deal with the new arrivals.
We're going through something that our country will continue to deal with over the next few years. It will also change our country. We want this to be a change for the better, and we believe we can do it.
Under the plan, the German government will provide an additional 6 billion euros to take in and accommodate asylum seekers. Their applications are to be processed more quickly than before. The Balkans will be declared safe countries of origin, and no applications for asylum will be accepted. And Germany will ask other EU countries to take a bigger share of migrants, possibly the greatest challenge. Finally, the government will step up efforts to disrupt human trafficking. Of course we can cope with taking in, accommodating and integrating 800,000 refugees this year. But it's also clear to everyone that we cannot repeat this every year. We need a different European refugee policy. That means increasing the pressure on EU countries that have until now refused to take in asylum seekers. The German government wants a unified European asylum policy. The opposition Green Party is pleased that the coalition government is finally taking action. I think it's good that Germany has come together in this difficult situation. Essentially, we politicians are learning from the people and we're following their lead. He's referring to the many people who are welcoming and helping newly arrived asylum seekers. Chancellor Merkel too has praised those efforts. She knows that coping with what the government calls the greatest challenge since reunification will only be possible with the public's continued support.
Well, the United Nations says more than 3 million Syrians are now living abroad, many in refugee camps in neighboring countries. Now, that figure dwarfs the number agreed to this week by France and Britain. Both countries say together they'll take in 44,000 asylum seekers from the war-ravaged country.
The Prime Minister said 20,000 more Syrians would be given shelter in Britain over the next 5 years. He portrayed it as a gesture of support in the face of a huge problem.
In doing so, we'll continue to show the world that this country is a country of extraordinary compassion, always standing up for our values and helping those in need.
At a news conference in Paris, French President François Hollande said his country would take in 24,000 refugees over the next 2 years.
Our history is one marked by generations of refugees and asylum seekers who have come here to make France with us. The right to asylum is a fundamental principle of our institutions and is written in the preamble to our Constitution. Every person persecuted because of their actions has the right to freedom and the right of asylum in the territory of the French Republic.
In the meantime, both Paris and London are driving forward efforts to end the civil war in Syria, which they see as the root cause of the refugee crisis. While Britain carried out a first airstrike on Islamic State militants in Syria, Hollande announced that reconnaissance flights would start on Tuesday to prepare for French airstrikes on IS positions.
All right, let's pull in our correspondent, Naomi Conrad. She is on the story for us here in Berlin. Good evening to you, Naomi. We're talking about almost 1 million people coming to Germany this year alone, 6 billion euros being allocated for them. Where is that money coming from, and is it going to be enough?
So these are federal funds. We're talking about obviously a very big number and also a very big influx of refugees that Germany has to deal with. Whether or not the money is enough, we can only speculate because a lot depends on developments in the region, on how many refugees come to Germany in the coming months, even in the coming years. But we have to remember that this comes with a whole raft of other measures we heard earlier, such as speeding up asylum procedures for people from the Balkans, speedier asylum procedures more generally, even for Syrian refugees. And I think there's also a realization here in Berlin that more has to be done to help the neighboring countries around Syria, who are, after all, bearing the brunt of the refugee crisis, who are hosting more refugees than Europe at this point.
Yeah, you know, the word neighbor is a buzzword right now. Britain and France stepping up to the plate, saying they're going to take in more refugees. What about Eastern European countries? They're very, very reluctant right now to do more. Is there any pressure being put on them to do more?
Yes, they're indeed very reluctant. Even countries like Slovakia, which have said that they only want to take in Christian refugees, which obviously is just not acceptable in Europe. We can only speculate what kind of pressure is being exerted behind the scenes in Brussels right now. But when you talk to parliamentarians in Brussels off the record, they are not very hopeful that Europe will actually be able to implement the quota system that Commission President Juncker is about to unveil on Wednesday. It's likely, and that's what also a lot of parliamentarians say, that there might be a kind of opt-out out of the European solidarity. So countries, at least that's the information leaking out of Brussels at the moment, might be able to opt out of taking in more refugees. This is obviously aimed at Eastern European countries, but would then have to pay into a European solidarity fund, which would be used to, say, run these reception centres that people have been talking about in southern Europe. So I'm sure there's a lot of pressure being exerted at this point, but whether it's successful, we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, time will certainly tell. Naomi Conrad on the story for us here in Berlin. Naomi, thank you very much. And as if there weren't enough problems in Syria already, the U.S. is voicing concern over what appears to be a Russian military buildup there. Washington says it's concerned that the Kremlin may be moving in to bolster its ally, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad.
This battle in northern Syria is thought to have been filmed 2 weeks ago. In the spring, troops loyal to President Bashar al-Assad were on the brink of defeat. Then there was a dramatic turnaround. This armored personnel carrier could help provide an explanation. Russian blogger Ruslan Leviev combs the internet for evidence that Russian troops are involved in Syria's civil war. That's from Russia. It's an armored personnel carrier with Russian markings. Under a false name, Leviev searches for proof on social media. He found out through a Russian woman that her husband, a Marine, had been sent to Syria along with others, and that military equipment had been loaded on a ship bound for Syria. There are about 300 men in each of these photos. I'd say between 1,000 and 2,000 Russians are in Syria. Photos of Russian soldiers posing next to images of Assad and Russian President Vladimir Putin are showing up online more frequently. The captions praise their heroic bravery and refer to them as real men. For a long time, Leviev says, Russia had only a small technical repair base in Syria. Now we can see that an actual marine base has sprung up. Lots of heavy military gear is being shipped there. There aren't just advisors, but also special forces and combat personnel. They've probably been brought in to protect something or as reinforcements. What is Putin about to do? On Friday, he said it was premature to discuss the possibility of Russian troops in Syria. We need political change there, of course. Syrian President Assad has agreed to put off early parliamentary elections and to govern with, shall we say, a healthy opposition. Kirill Martynov, a journalist, says Putin is hoping to get out of isolation and forge a new anti-terror alliance, an idea he'll put to the UN in New York. The probability that he'll try to make some sort of deal with the West is fairly high, and that could help soften the current Cold War rhetoric. Over the weekend, Russia's foreign minister and U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry spoke by phone. Kerry warned Moscow of an escalation in Syria if Russia continues to support Assad.